There's a lot of misconceptions about trans people, and people like J.K. Rowling's don't help. On the contrary, they just spread even more misconception that harm trans people in their everyday life. Just think about Blair White, who constantly spread misinformation and got caught repetitively lying about trans issues. She literally could have her own top 10, no, top 20 lies she made about trans issues. There's also the infamous book Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Your Daughters by Abigail Schreier, full of misinformation, pseudoscience, and blatant transphobia. Again, this book could have its own video. So here's a top 10 of misconception about trans people that I will gladly debunk for you. Let's begin simple. Point 1. Gender doesn't equal sex. We usually use the words gender and sex interchangeably, one only seeming more scientific than the other. If you fill up a form, you've got a lot of chance of being asked your gender, then being given the sexes male-female as a choice, as if it was the same. But the truth is, gender and sex are different. Gender is a social construct. Yes, I said it. That word that nobody takes seriously. From culture to culture, and even in the same culture but depending on the time of history, womanhood and manhood will represent different things. Not only how they dress or how they present, but the intrinsic qualities that are attributed to them in terms of character and how to act in society. To be clear, a social construct doesn't mean it isn't real. Money and language are socially constructed, but they are still very important and can affect people's lives. And while gender is an inherent characteristic of our culture and how we understand the world and ourselves, sex is biology. Sex actually represents multiple sex characteristics that one can have, independently of their gender. So no, J.K. Rowling, we're not trying to say that sex isn't real. It is. We're just following the actual science. Point 2. You don't need dysphoria to be trans. Being trans means identifying with a different gender than the one you were assigned at birth. No other requirements. The way you identify to that gender is completely to your own discretion. It may be easier for people to understand transgender people if it was a mental health issue that could be quantified, analyzed, but no, gender is a social construct, a human creation, and so your interpretation of that human creation and how you agree or disagree with it is the only condition. Some will have dysphoria and some won't, and there will always be some people with different level of dysphoria from low to high. According to the United Kingdom's National Health Service, many people with gender dysphoria have a strong, lasting desire to live a life that matches or express their gender identity, and do this by changing the way they look and behave. But the NHS also says that people with gender dysphoria, but not all, may want to use hormones and sometimes surgery to express their gender identity. People may know they are trans by having dysphoria, but there are other means for people to learn that they prefer to be treated as a gender contrary to what they were assigned at birth. Point 3. The trans in transgender doesn't mean transition. This is one of the big misconceptions about transgender is that the trans in transgender stands for transition and that therefore a big part of being transgender is about transitioning. While the reality is, the trans in transgender is actually the Latin prefix trans, meaning across from or on the other side of. Thinking that the trans in transgender means transition actually harm many trans people. It implied that to be valid as a trans person, you must either transition or desire transition, which is a trans medicalist talking point to gatekeep the term transgender and again perpetuate the myth that you need dysphoria in order to be trans. A lot of trans people, either binary or non-binary, do not desire transition, and it doesn't make them any less valid than those who seek transition. There are many reasons why someone trans won't transition, and it should never be used to invalidate them. Being transgender simply means identifying as a different gender than the one you were assigned at birth. Cisgender is also an official term, meaning that you identify as the gender you were assigned at birth. Cis isn't a slur, like many may want to make you believe. It's simply the Latin prefix cis, meaning on the same side of. Literally the opposite of the Latin prefix trans. The cis-trans distinction is even used in chemistry. In the context of chemistry, cis indicates that the functional group are on the same side of the carbon chain, while trans convey that functional groups are on the opposite sides of the carbon chain. Point 4. Gender nonconforming doesn't equal trans. There's a vague idea that comes around often that if gender is a social construct, and if we only need our own idea of our identity to dictate our gender, that means we believe that being a guy wearing dresses or being a tomboy means being trans. But that's not the case at all. Your identity isn't related to how you perform your gender. You are a boy or a girl or non binary, depending on how you perceive yourself, not how you act in society within the strict gender roles that can be quite random sometimes. Like, why is blue a boyish color and pink a girly one? It used to be the opposite not so long ago. Men used to wear makeup, wigs, high heel, and even skirts. Some cis people can be gender nonconforming, and some trans people are also gender nonconforming, and both are valid in their gender expression. As I said earlier, gender is a social construct, meaning that there is nothing biological regarding what are considered boy and girl tastes. Either colors, toys, clothing are all part of the socially constructed genders of boy and girl. You can be feminine and still be a man. You can be masculine and be a woman. You can be androgynous and still be cisgender, and not all non binary people are androgynous. Your gender identity and gender expression don't have to align with gender norms. As I talked earlier, your gender identity is your internal sense of being male, female, or something else. It's our sense of self and who we are and how we describe ourselves. Point 5. Trans kids don't get sex change. It's a common misconception pushed by reactionaries that trans youth is a form of child abuse. They will use extreme language to twist the truth and make it look like allowing kids to transition is abuse, like saying that they are giving hormones to kids which will chemically castrate them, looking at you, Blair White, or even give them a sex change. None of this is true. Trans kids only transition socially, which is a change of haircut, clothes, pronoun, their name. There is no medical intervention done on a prepubescent child. When they start puberty, trans youth may take puberty blockers, which aren't hormones, doesn't make them infertile, and is totally reversible. Puberty blockers merely delay puberty, so trans teens don't have to go through a puberty that could worsen their dysphoria. It's an approved and recommended procedure for trans youth by the medical community that showed a great improvement for trans youth mental health and helped reduce suicidality. Allowing trans youth to transition, socially at first and then with puberty blockers, is a life-saving treatment. And misinformation regarding this will cause harm, and this is why it's important to debunk this myth. Older teens and young adults may then be prescribed hormone therapy, HRT, which is partially reversible. It will eventually make them potentially infertile, but there is the option to freeze their eggs or sperm if they want biological children. Then, as adults, they can choose to go through surgery, including gender or sex reassignment surgery, formerly known as sex change. Sexual orientation has no correlation with gender identity. One of the misconceptions I've seen recently, and was popularized by the likes of J.K. Rowling's, aka TERF, is that transitioning is a new form of gay conversion therapy. Not only is this absolutely wrong, but also quite harmful. As we said earlier with trans youth, transitioning is a life-saving procedure that was proven to help improve trans people's mental health and prevent suicidality. Spreading this false narrative that transitioning is a form of gay conversion therapy for kids could prevent a lot of them from getting the help they actually need, the actual help, as suggested by the medical professional. The idea behind is that gay kids are pushed to be straight by transitioning to the opposite sex so they can be viewed as heterosexual by society. This totally ignores the fact that many trans people are in gay relationships, which means that they were perceived as straight by society until they transition. According to their logic that transitioning is a form of gay conversion therapy, it would make no sense for apparent straight people to transition and then being seen as gay by society. This logic is simply flawed and meant to portray transitioning as something as horrible as conversion therapy, while in reality, people pushing for this narrative are the one promoting conversion therapy. Forcing trans kids to be a gender that they are not is conversion therapy and the real child abuse. Point 7. Trans women are not biologically male, and trans men are not biologically female. This one is a tricky one to explain. I mean, the internet decided their childhood was ruined when Bill Nye came to explain a more complex version of determination of gender and sex. But I'm sorry, that's just science getting updated, as new discoveries are still made to this day, and science also been a tad more complicated than what we were presented in 8th grade. Sex is not genitals, nor is it only chromosomes. Sex is what we refer to for talking about a whole set of sexual characteristics, primary or secondary. So it also includes hormones, body mass, bone structures, muscle, body hair, height, etc., which can overlap between what people consider male and female. The description of modern scientific attitude towards human sex is that the view that the world population can be separate into a clearly defined dyadic unit of male and female is defunct. Not only clinical observation, but molecular biology has established that sexual identity is on a continuum with an enormous potential for variance. These sexual characteristics do encompass chromosome and genitals, but take in consideration a lot of more factors. With that, we can understand that sex is not binary, as there are, for example, intersex people who don't follow your typical sexual characteristics. So instead of a direct binary, sex is a bimodal distribution of masculine and feminine characteristics that tend to be closer to the extreme, with various types of outlier, mainly intersex people. The same things go for trans people. Saying that a trans man that had surgery, hormones for years is still biological female is still thinking in a binary way that doesn't represent the bimodal distribution of sexual characteristic. There is no easy answer in science. Trans women don't have an advantage in women's sport and trans men are viable in men's sport. One of the biggest narratives that has been pushed by reactionaries is how trans women are a danger for women's sport. They push this image of an overly muscular and masculine woman who will utterly destroy cis women. Neither of the overall studies support this caricature, and neither does science and biology. One of the most recent South Park episodes was a parody of this idea, with a character that exactly fit this caricature some people have of trans women athletes. Some people were offended by the episode. I wasn't. I know it was just a parody, and even in the episode itself, it was pretty clear the character wasn't supposed to represent an accurate trans athlete. South Park isn't meant to be taken seriously. As it's true that you shouldn't feel offended, you shouldn't take it seriously either. Some people actually said that the episode was realistically portraying the issue about trans women and trans sports. Like, my dude, what? No trans woman athlete look like that, and this situation can't happen in real life. You can't just identify as a woman and then compete in a women's sport. A trans woman needs to have been on HRT for at least a year and has her testosterone level tested. That shit just ain't real. The conclusion of a study published in Sport Medicine was that currently there is no direct or consistent research suggesting transgender female individuals have an athletic advantage at any stage of their transition, and therefore competitive sports policies that place restriction on transgender people need to be considered and potentially revised. People tend to forget how big of an impact HRT are on one's biology. Trans women actually have a harder time than cis women growing muscle mass because of HRT. When we talk about trans athletes, we tend to overlook trans men. Same as trans women belong in women's sport, trans men belong in men's sport and are in no way, shape, or form less viable than cis men. Just like trans women, HRT massively changes trans men's body and biology. Take a look at Patricio Manuel, an American professional boxer and first trans man as a professional boxer in the US, who is in no way inferior or weaker than cis men boxers. Point 9. The trans predator epidemic is a myth. When we see the media in the concern of thirst about access to bathroom for trans people and Dun dun dun. So much coverage about people like Jessica Yaniv. We get the impression that trans predator, or worse, male predators pretending to be trans because of a wig and a skirt, are everywhere just waiting for more clues in bathrooms to commit crimes. As if it will somehow be now legal for them to assault if they're labeled as girl. As if girls can't be predator, or that adding another law will somehow stop predators to do something that is already illegal. But coming back to the main point, this idea only stems from the fear mongering, highlighting ignorance about trans people and translating it into fear, as a lot of people still don't understand it, and there's no data backing this. On the contrary, being trans is usually what gets you harassed and assaulted. That's what the data indicated. In 2018, a study was published in the Journal of Sexuality Research and Social Policy, which discussed how legislation, regulation, litigation, and ballot propositions affecting public restroom access for transgender people increased drastically in the last 3 years. And opponent of gender identity inclusive public accommodation non-discrimination law often cites fear of safety and privacy violation in public restroom if such laws are passed. Will proponents argue that such laws are needed to protect transgender people and concerns regarding safety and privacy violation are unfounded? What they found was that there was no empirical evidence that have been gathered to test such law effect. Furthermore, this study provides evidence that fears of increased safety and privacy violation as a result of non-discrimination law are not empirically grounded. Additionally, according to Rain, most rapes and sexual assault are committed by people the victim knew, not random men and women claiming to be transgender going into bathrooms. Also, according to their analysis of rape and sexual assault in the US, 48% of survivors were at home sleeping or performing another activity at home. 29 were traveling, running errands. 12 were working. 7% were at school. And 5% doing an unknown or other activity. Therefore, it can be inferred that rape and bathroom are very rare overall, and even then, it is not because of trans people. Additionally, according to a study conducted by the British National Centre for Social Research, a vast majority of cis women are not, in fact, concerned about which facilities transgender people use. They found that 72% of women said that they were very or quite comfortable with a transgender woman using a female toilet. Point 10. The detransitioners epidemic myth. This is probably the biggest concern regarding transitioning, the detransitioners. Reactionaries love to bring up detransitioners to push their narrative and weaponize them against trans people, especially trans youth. They make it look like it's high risk and blow it out of proportion. You may see a lot of detransitioners online, but proportionally to the number of people who transition, they are a really low number. Think about it. Most transition are successful and improve trans people's lives, and those people have no reason to extensively talk about it online, as they're just living their life happily. While the low number of people who have a negative experience regarding transitioning are more likely to talk about it. The loud minority, as we often say. Regrets following gender transition are extremely rare and have become even rarer as both surgical technique and social support have improved. Pooling data from numerous studies demonstrated a regret rate ranging from 0.3% to 3.8%. Regrets are more likely a result of a lack of social support after transitioning or poor surgical outcomes using older technique. The current academic consensus is that the risk of detransitioning is very low and is addressed by social issues which affect trans people. Bonus point. Things you think are compliments to trans people that really aren't. What, a bonus point in a supposedly top 10 list? What is it, what mojo? Why not call it a top 11 then? Because I'm a maniac and I can't accept a top ending on an odd number other than 5, okay? That and this point isn't much of a misconception per se, more like a friendly suggestion. Certain comments viewed as compliments towards trans people aren't really compliments. For example, you had me fooled, or really, you're doing such a good job passing for a girl, give the feeling that trans people are deceiving others, or that you don't really see them for the gender they identify as. Same with, you look so pretty for someone trans that, even if it's usually not the intention, imply that being trans is ugly. Also, if you accidentally misgender someone trans, just correct yourself and apologize. There is no need to make a scene and over exaggerate it. No need to go all, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to! A simple, oh, sorry, and proceed to use the right pronouns. Easy peasy. Most trans people don't want to be treated in a special way and just want to live a normal life, being true to themselves. So anything that draws attention to them, especially for being trans, should be avoided. Same for telling them how brave they are. As I said earlier, they want to be treated like anyone else and not to be put on a pedestal for simply living their life authentically. Conclusion. As you can see, most misconceptions about trans people that paint them in a bad light are actually wrong and factually incorrect. Trans people are just people trying to live their life safely and with dignity, but those constant lies about them spread by reactionaries and turf endanger them. It's a threat to their very lives. Transitioning is proven to be a life-saving procedure for many trans people, but the misinformation regarding trans youth can prevent many to have access to it and increase their chance of suicidality. Trans people have a high level of suicides given their constant discrimination by society and the lack of access to healthcare to transition. Those unjustified hatred against them can also lead to physical attack against them and even murder. The lives of a marginalized minority are at stake, and those misinformation often purposely spread to further an anti-trans agenda based on feelings instead of fact are a serious threat to their safety. We need to stick up for trans people, our fellow human beings, and show kindness, compassion, and empathy. Do the right thing, denounce those lies, fact check what those reactionaries say, and spread the truth. No human being deserves to live in fear simply for who they are.